PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. The golden boy of Argentinian chess, Faustino Oro, is back in action again, vying to become the youngest ever international master in chess history. He's just 10 years old. I featured one of his games very recently, and yeah, he's back in action again, playing in a small closed IM tournament in Barcelona. This is his first round game. Let's see how he got on. Now his opponent here, playing black, is Hipolito, Asis, Gargatagli. I've probably butchered that, but I just want to say, I've got to applaud his parents. What a fantastic name. Great stuff. In fact, Faustino Oro, also a wonderful name as well. So here we go. So Faustino playing white. It's a Nimzo Indian. Now, when I was 10 years old, I was looking at forced wins in the King's Gambit and hoping to trick my opponent. Not Faustino. He is playing solid main lines, looking to get a slight advantage, keep the tension in the position. This is such a mature way to play. So, as I said in the previous video, it seems to me that he's been very well schooled indeed. So, really solid line, this typical pawn structure. When you have this from a Queen's Gambit, then the bishop, of course, is on e7, and that gives black more options. With the bishop on b4, then I think it's important to strike out with c5, otherwise the bishop on b4 is misplaced. So this makes sense of the bishop. There's immediate pressure on white's centre. And now bishop e6. Yeah, it's a necessary way to play, otherwise the d-pawn can become too weak. So we have an isolated queen's pawn position, but not one that's very scary for white. Very often if you have an isolated queen's pawn, then it gives you space, and that gives you often the opportunity to set up an early initiative, maybe attacking the king. But here, black's pieces just somehow aren't very actively placed, and this is, a slightly unpleasant pin. So, to my eyes, white is just slightly better in this position. Nevertheless, it's absolutely fine for black. Bishop d3 from Faustino, so just very sensible development. Now one could, play a normal move like rook c8, but Hipolito exchanges on d4 and plays queen b6. So now we've got basically a symmetrical pawn structure. The queen has stepped out of this pin, so this is a very pragmatic way for black to play. So the queen is actively placed, hitting the d-pawn, and black is going to look to get some play on the c-file. Nevertheless, in playing like this, of course, white has the two bishops. So that's what white has to play for. Can you exploit the advantage of the two bishops, or the notional advantage of the two bishops? That bishop doesn't look very nice on e6. That's one thing here. That's blocked in. So yeah, it looks to me like white has a little advantage here. Of course, queen takes pawn will be met by bishop h7 check. And that's why king h8 was played here after some thought. Nakamura and Carlsen have actually reached this position before. I have a funny feeling that Faustino might have known that. He seems to know his theory quite well. Carlsen played knight e4, but this didn't solve all his problems, because after this, certainly white looks to have the more pleasant position. This d-pawn turned out to be very dangerous, and Nakamura actually beat Carlsen. That was an online game. So king h8, it looks a slightly funny move. I don't like pushing the king all the way into the corner, but, well, it seems okay. And there is a threat to take on d4, so white has to react. So Faustino, after 8 minutes, played bishop e2. I should mention this is a classical game. 90 minutes for each player plus 30 seconds increment per move. So this is sensible chess. And I mean, the advantage of playing like this for black is that it's forced this bishop back. And now with the bishop removed from this diagonal, then bishop f5. And the bishop reaches a much better square than e6. So, you know, very reasonable play by black, I think. So f3, that prevents a knight coming in here. Rook d8, yeah, sensible. At some point this pawn is going to need some protection. And rook c8, so this is where black is going to get some counterplay. Now, as I said, you know, as a 10-year-old, I would have been lashing out. You know, that's what you do. You just kind of go for it. And, you know, if white wants to lash out, then, you know, g4 is potentially an option. You know, maybe even moves like king h1, rook g1, and g5. I mean, I've seen Korchnoi play like this in very similar positions. But not our Faustino. He plays rook c1. He's very restrained. I mean, I find this extraordinary, actually, for a 10-year-old. Queen a5, rook fd1. So everything is very classical, very mature. So why rook d1? Well, the queen is now protected, so that, you know, potentially you could move the knight out of the way. a6 and bishop f1. So just tucking the bishop out of the way. And you never know, the rook at some point might use the e-file. Rook c6. And once again, g4. g4 is possible in so many cases over the next few moves. You know, this is very tempting. Even playing f4. Now, normally I wouldn't like to do this because it weakens this square, but with the pin, well, I can get away with this. And f5. Something like this. You know, this shuts this bishop out of play for some time. It's very tempting to play like this, but it does raise the stakes. Because every time you make a pawn move, it weakens the squares behind it. And later on, you know, a move like knight e4 might be possible. All the squares on the king side have been weakened. I mean, there's no clear breakthrough for white. But it would have been very tempting to play like this. But no, not Faustino's cup of tea. Very mature. He puts a rook on an open file. Bishop g6. So that's obviously Hipolito was slightly fearful of perhaps g4, so he's just preempting that and putting the bishop on g6. Now this is a big decision from Faustino. He could wait. He could maybe play a3. He could perhaps double on the e-file. He goes for bishop d3. So he doesn't like the look of this bishop. But is it right to exchange off the bishops? I mean, normally, you know, you would want to keep the bishop pair. But it's a very pragmatic decision, just removing that light squared bishop, which is, after all, quite a strong piece. So rook c8 played, doubling on the c-file, looks very reasonable. One could also play knight f8, I quite like that. Bouncing around to g6, just to get rid of that bishop. But rook c8 I think is okay. Rook e2. Okay, now we're going to see that, you know, white has a clear plan to occupy the e-file. b5, and black is looking to get counterplay on the c-file. This is all very reasonable. Black plays rook c4 here. Yeah, I mean, this looks absolutely fine for black. Rook e1, so doubling on the e-file. Okay, looks very reasonable. And here, black goes b4. Queen b6 looks like a good move to me, hitting this pawn. So that obviously drags the bishop back, and then switching the knight round. But white does get some play here on the king side, or just down the e-file. Is this significant? Well, I suspect black is okay here. You know, this is a nice maneuver, putting the knight around here, and these squares are covered. But, you know, white can also, you has some play in this position. There's some nice manoeuvring can go on. It's an interesting position. But b4, this starts to get a little bit tricky. I suspect they were getting into time pressure at this moment. Pawn takes pawn, and here black makes a blunder. So rook takes b4 should be played. And then queen f5. Well, white has some activity, but nothing absolutely clear. But queen takes b4. Okay, over to you. Time for me to have a little drink. Time for you to have a think. So white to play. What would you do next? White to play. In fact, there's a little tactic that black had obviously overlooked. Black's pieces look very nice because these are the two targets, the B and D pawns, but he's overlooked that after this, knight takes D5 is possible, of course. There's a back rank trick. If knight takes, then rook E8. That's rather unfortunate for the king. H7 square is covered. So after this, the queen is attacked, has to go back, so white has won a pawn. And can actually inflict some damage on black's king side as well. So queen takes, again, the back rank is weak. So pawn takes is necessary, not very pleasant. But with just major pieces on the board, it's actually not too bad for black. Rook e8 played. Exchange of rooks looks reasonable. And now the technical phase begins. So Faustino is a pawn up. But this is not easy to win. Major piece endgames have a tendency to drift towards a draw. Often, for example, in a rook and pawn endgame, one pawn is not quite enough to win. And without minor pieces, it's difficult to attack black's king. You can imagine a knight floating in. That would be a very different scenario, or a bishop as well. But without minor pieces, the king is actually not too bad on g7. So how does Faustino make progress? Well, I think this next phase he plays extremely well. So rook d1. The d pawn needs protection, and perhaps it can be pushed. Queen b6. So these are still targets, actually. So the queen drops back to e2, nice and secure. So the rook is still protecting the d pawn. Rook d8, hitting the d pawn. Queen f2, nice square, everything is protected. Queen b3 and rook d2. So he's set up very well. So black can't make any more progress. But how does white make progress? So black waits with queen c4, just maintaining the pressure. This next part, very nice. Okay, it's clear you have to improve the position of the king before you can think about going forward. So h4 is very good. That covers the g5 square, so it means that no black piece can use g5 to block. So that check will always be available. And it gives the king a square on h2. So h5 and queen g3 check. So it's nice to push the king around a little bit, and the queen has moved to a nice active square. And king h2. So this is very typical of this kind of end game, or it's close to an end game. Very important to improve the position of the king. That's covered by the queen. And then with the king relatively safe, it might be possible to do something else. We're at around about move 40 now, and I suspect that, well, judging by the clock times, it seems to me that both players are probably running a little bit short of time, perhaps especially black. When I say the clock times, I've just got the time each player made for each move. So rook d5, played quite quickly. It looks like one of those really natural moves where you just blockade that isolated pawn. In fact, it's a mistake, and here Faustino seized the moment. g4. Very nice. So he just wants to crack open the king. I mean, perhaps playing the pawn forward to h5 was a mistake. It might have been better just to leave the pawn at h6. Well, white had other options there, but anyway. This is certainly an excellent move. Simply looking to crack things open and attack the king. Pawn takes pawn, queen takes check, and the queen came back. And obviously if the king comes to g7, then rook g2 is fatal. So the king had to step out into the middle. Oof, that looks very unpleasant. Now rook e2 check, not possible, because the queen covers there. So what would you do next? I'd really like this next move. What did Faustino play now? White play. I mean, of course, there are quite a few decent moves here, but this one I thought was really impressive. Before he does anything more, just makes a little improving move with the king. So it's off this diagonal, so it means that he might look to check and perhaps play rook e2, depending on how black plays. He keeps all his options open, and actually I think it's also just a waiting move, and it's very difficult for black to wait in this position. You know, if the rook retreats, then the h-pawn might advance. Otherwise, there could be a check here. The rook might activate. So anyway, black played rook e5. Okay, looks tricky. Looking to activate. And of course, pawn takes is impossible. But it's a mistake. It's a clear mistake. And Faustino seized his chance. b3, played very quickly, is an excellent move. Of course, if queen takes, then you can take the rook. Rook e2 check doesn't help. Of course, one would like to play into a queen and pawn endgame, but after this, no. It loses instantly. Exchange of queens, and that is game over with two passed pawns here. So the queen had to retreat. Well, excuse me, if it retreats, of course, then pawn takes rook. It has to come to b4 rather. Absolutely forced to maintain the pin. And that gives white the chance to swing the rook into action. And this is fatal for the king. Yeah, rook c7 check coming with a winning attack. Black played queen takes b3, rook c7 check. Yeah, be careful, that's attacked. Rook c7, king d8, and rook c6. The king is safe because any check, it'll just step up to g3. Notice how important it is that rook g5 isn't possible. So h4 was a really nice move. Queen b2 check, king g3. And I mean, this is just lost basically. There's too many pieces attacked, too many pawns attacked. The king is open. That's really the point. Queen b4 played. Queen takes f6. Check. Rook has to go back, and rook d6, and that was game over. Black resigned. If the king steps this way, then queen takes rook. And if the king steps that way, queen h8 is checkmate. Very, very good. It's funny. This game makes me think of one of the games from the current European Championship. I'm talking football, of course, where one of the more experienced teams, like Spain or Portugal, is playing one of the lesser teams, and they play solidly at the back. You know, passing really nicely, and then they just pick off their opponents when they make an error, and they are deadly on goal. You know, Cristiano Ronaldo combining with Bruno Fernandes, and suddenly, bang, it's in the back of the net. And that's what happened here. So, you know, Faustino is playing very sensibly, very maturely, very solidly. You know, he's maintain the tension. So we have the position here, where just a very tense middle game position. Black isn't necessarily worse, but there's a lot of possibilities. And black makes an error, and bang, he wins a pawn. And then even after that, okay, it's not simple to win this position, but very nice moves like h4, and then putting the king on h2. So this is just very tidy play. And then suddenly black makes a blunder, g4. He seized the moment again, bang, he's in. And then a couple of moments later, king g2. Very clever little shuffle. And again, black makes an error, the final fatal error. And he's in, and in a couple of moves, black's king is checkmated. Superb play, quality play from Faustino. You know, to win a game of chess, often you don't have to make the absolute best moves for the whole game. It's necessary just to make good moves. And that's what Faustino did here. He made good moves for the entire game, and his opponent cracked. And he seized the moment at the critical junctures in the game. So Faustino has started with 2 out of 2 in this closed round-robin IM tournament in Barcelona. Let's see how he gets on. He might become the youngest IM in history. Let's see. Thanks for watching.